Hey everybody, welcome back to homerecordingmadeeasy.com and here on my YouTube channel. And this time out, we're going to take a look at another one of the new Presonus console emulation plugins, part of the retro mix pack or whatever they're calling it. This is the Brit console. This is the SSL emulation. Last week we took a look at the Alpine Desk, which is the API emulation. So go check that out. Link will be in the description box below. We're going to listen to this on a master bus and a couple other buses. Going to walk you through the plugin, show you how it works, and talk to you a little bit about console emulation and why you may want to check this out. But before we get to that, if you like what you see in this video, hit that subscribe button. Also go out to homerecordingmadeeasy.com. Get your free $50 mixing course. It's right on the homepage. It's my gift to you just for checking out homerecordingmadeeasy.com. And if you stick around till the end of the video, I'm going to give you another free gift as well. So jump into Studio One. Here we are. So as of the recording of this video, the Brit console and the rest of the console emulation plugins, where the Mix Effects Engine, as they call it, is part of the professional package. You have to have the professional version, or I believe the Presonus software or membership, their monthly membership, to get this. I don't believe the Prime and the Artist version has the ability to use the Mix Effects Engine, but you want to check their website for current pricing and information because they're always changing that, and depending on when you're watching this video, it could be or not be included. I'm not sure, but as of the recording of this video, it's not. The Brit console is part of the new Retro Mix Legends bundle, which includes this, the Alpine Desk, and the Porta cassette, which we're going to look at in another video. These are not free plugins that come with Professional. It is a paid upgrade. I don't know if it comes as part of Presonus. You again got to check the website. This is the SSL emulation, which they're calling the Brit console. Now, console emulation is one of those things where, and again, I tip my hat to Presonus. I said this in the last video. They are continuing to push the envelope with their state space modeling and coming up with these third-party plugin emulations that emulate the old analog gear, right? They did the FEC comp, they did the tube comp, they did the passive EQ. I think there's some other ones in there. They've done the Console Shaper Pro, and now they're doing the new ones as well. And I think that's great because what's great about these plugins, and if you are new to mixing, when you are working with these analog style plugins that emulate the vintage consoles and old pieces of gear, it brings a little bit more life, a little bit more pizzazz, a little bit more flavor to our mixes. And I know those are kind of broad words, but when you were running in the analog days, when you run audio signal through analog gear, there is a certain sound characteristic and sound that it imparts on the audio. Things like harmonic distortion, things like, warmth and compression and all those types of things. And when we went to the digital domain completely in the box, you lose some of that. It sounds a little sterile, sounds a little flat, a little linear. These kind of plugins will help breathe back some of that analog life back into your signal. And console emulation is one way to do it. Now, with Studio One, the way the Mix Effects Engine works is these are intended to be put only on the buses. So like right now, we're looking at the instance on the master bus. But I'm going to show you a little bit more, I wouldn't say in advance, but another way to use these things to get a little bit more out of them. So what I have here is I have a session, let me close this for a second, that's completely unmixed, no plugins at all. Just kind of threw up the faders, did a rough static mix. We got drums, we got some percussion, some bass, acoustic and electric guitar, pianos and organs. We're muting all the vocals due to copyright, things on YouTube. All of those different groupings of instruments are coming down to a busing system down here on the right hand side. We have a drum bus, a percussion bus, a bass bus, an acoustic guitar bus, an electric guitar bus, and a keyboard bus. And on those buses, all I'm adding right now is a little bit of a channel strip just from an EQ and compression standpoint to clean up some of the raw audio, but it's very, very subtle because I want you to be able to hear what the console emulation plugins are doing. Now, I've also inserted this Brit console across all of the buses, but right now they are off. And I want to get to that in a second. Right now, the only instance that's on is the one that's on the master bus. Let's walk through the controls and see how this kind of works. So it's really simple. On the left-hand side, we have our drive button. The more you turn it up, the more drive, the more audio signal you're going to push into the plugin, the more coloration and distortion, in the good way, good types of distortion that we're going to get, saturation. So we turn that on and off here. We can even boost it to give us even a little bit more kick by clicking that. Next to that, we have the noise. And what the noise is going to do for us as we turn it up, if you're listening on a pair of headphones, you'll hear a subtle little white noise, tape hiss, okay, that emulates old gear, analog gear in and of itself has what we call a noise floor. It has a lot of hiss and noise that is there. So it's great that the plugin emulates that. I'm gonna back that off a little bit. And then we have a noise gate here. And what the noise gate will do is even if you have the noise activated, if there's no signal, well, in this case, it's on the master bus, so there's always audio passing through it. But let's say this was on a guitar bus and there was no guitar playing at a particular point in the song, the noise gate will keep you from hearing the noise. It'll squash it down so you don't hear the noise in quiet passages, if that makes any sense. Next to that, we have crosstalk. Now, what crosstalk is something really clever. So when you're looking at an analog console, in this case, an SSL or Brit console, and let's say you have channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, et cetera, right? Your kick channel, your kick drum's coming in on channel 1. Let's say your snare drum's coming in on channel 2. Those channels that are physically right next to each other in an actual analog console, especially as a console would start to age and some of the electronics would start to wear and some of them would start to become even faulty, it would even give a little bit more or a little bit of a unique sound characteristic to that particular console, as electronics would tend to wear and show signs of age. And what would happen is you'd actually have a little bit of bleed from channel 1 into channel 2. So some of the kick drum, you would hear just a faint amount of it on the snare track. And then the snare track on channel 2 might bleed a little bit into channel 3, the hi-hat mic. And what this does is this allows you to dial in more or less of that bleed, or what we call crosstalk. The more you turn this up, and I'll demonstrate this in a second, the more you're going to kind of hear the tracks kind of overlap together a little bit and kind of mush together. That's a technical term, by the way, mush. And so this is something you probably want to do more subtly. It's not something that you want it to be so obvious, but it is a characteristic that happens in analog consoles, especially the ones from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, okay? So that's what that does. In the center, we have style here. And this is where they modeled 3 different versions, if you will, of a British console. Vintage is probably the 70s. Super is probably in the mid 80s, where that was really the heyday of the Brit console or the SSL, and then a modern is probably more like the J series. Little bit different EQ characteristic. You'll hear a little bit of a change between the 3. We'll demonstrate that as well. When you get down to the modern console, now you have this thing called harmonics. You have 2nd order harmonics and 3rd order harmonics, and without getting too geeky, basically all that means is you're adding a little bit more harmonic distortion to your signal. Let's just leave it at that, and it'll change subtly from 2nd order to the 3rd order, and you can sweep between the 2 2nd and 3rd order harmonics. Again, it's not something that's going to jump out and you're going to go, oh, listen to the difference. You won't even really hear the difference. It's all kind of happening as part of the algorithm under the hood. The character button, the way Presonus kind of describes this, is that when it's all the way down to 1.0, fully off, if you will, it kind of emulates or simulates the audio signal going through the console one time. And as you kind of turn this up, it kind of emulates the audio signal passing through the console several times. And what that just really means is you're going to hear a little bit more of an effect, maybe a little bit more tightness on the bottom end. It just gives it a little bit more color, a little bit more flavor. And then you have your master section, and the master section is really for as you're jacking up the character, jacking up the drive and some of the noise, the signal before and after turning on and off the plugin. It could be a little louder when you enable it, and then you can turn down the master a little bit to compensate. So when before you turn the plugin on and after, that volume should be about the same. That's called level matching the plugin, okay? So right now this is on the master bus. I kind of just dialed this in. Let's play around a little bit, Liz. I just kind of, you know, just running it kind of mildly. We'll start on the vintage setting and we'll start the character, maybe 60%. And I just want you to listen to the audio with me, bypassing the plugin, turning it on and off. So you could kind of hear what it does. You want to be listening to this on a good set of studio monitors or headphones, because I will warn you, especially with one instance of this only on the master bus, it's going to be subtle. But if you have a good set of headphones or a good monitoring system, you will hear a subtle difference. So keep your eye on the bypass button at the top left-hand corner. Gray means it's enabled, and amber means it is disabled or bypassed. Here we go. Here's With It. Okay, so there is a very subtle change, especially in the upper mid-range a little bit, but it's very, very subtle. And you may say, you may not even hear the difference. You may be saying to yourself, you know, Dave, I don't really hear the difference at all. And that's because one instance of this in and of itself is going to be very, very subtle to the point where like you may be thinking, really doesn't make much of a difference. But I'm going to show you a little trick in a minute to show you how you can get a little bit more out of these kinds of plugins when you put them on multiple buses. And we'll do that in a second. But before we do that, let me just go through and twist the drive, the noise, the crosstalk, so you can hear what that does. And then I'll switch between the styles and the harmonics. I'll start tweaking around a little bit so you can just kind of hear some of the subtle changes that happen when we play around with the controls. So here we go. Okay, so you really can hear the crosstalk, how it just appears to get a little louder because you have more overlap going on between the different tracks. So you can kind of want to use this in a subtle way. This is not something that should be so obvious. This should be something backed off a little bit, in my opinion. Same thing with the noise and even the drive. You know, you can hear when you hit the boost button, it gets a little bit more crispy, but I like to use this in a kind of a subtle way. And that's, in my opinion, you can always play around to find the sound that you like, but that's how I tend to use these kinds of plugins. Now let's switch between the vintage, super, and modern, just keeping it on the same settings just to see what that does. Okay, so in the styles, you can hear a much more obvious to my ears. I don't know how it comes across on YouTube, where you hear it go from a little bit warm, a little less transient, heavy, a little bit more compression. Then it gets a little bit more in the middle there on the super, and then on the modern, it's a little bit more transient, heavy, a little bit more punchy. You can hear it in the snare and the kick in particularly, and even on the hammers of the piano. Anything that has a heavy transient, you're going to notice it more and more. So it's just finding the blend of what you like. Now let's go over here to the character knob and let's see what that does on the 3 different styles. Okay, so now that's on just one instance, just on the master bus, and you may be saying to yourself again, yeah, that's great, Dave, you're turning all the knobs, but I really don't hear much of a difference, man. That's because, again, it's subtle. So now really the way I use these plugins and the way I would recommend it to use them, and you can do whatever you want, but here's a recommendation for good old Uncle Dave. So this is on the master bus. Let's close this for a second. One of the reasons why I use a busing system when I mix, and I've always done this, and as you can see down here, I have a drum bus, a percussion bus, a bass bus, an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar, and a keyboard bus. So that's 5 buses, 6 buses, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I put the mix effects on all of them. Okay, so now I have 6 plus the master bus. I have 7 instances of this. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it more obvious. It's going to give it a little more mojo, a little bit more vibe. It's not going to be as subtle. It's still going to be subtle, but it's going to be less subtle. This is how some of the third-party plugin companies that make something similar to this do it, where their plugins are typically a 2-part plugin. There's a part or a special part of the plugin that goes across all the individual tracks, and then there's one that goes on the buses, kind of like what the Mix effects engine does here. But in Studio One, you can only put this on the buses, not on all the individual tracks. When you put these across in a bunch of tracks, it's more of an accumulative effect thing. And so that's why I would suggest that you use buses, because you could put more instances of your console emulator here and you're going to get a little bit more vibe. So what I did was I dialed these in, again, very conservatively across these 7 buses just so you could hear the difference. And what I'm going to do now is play back the same passage of music, and I'm just going to turn them on and off. I'll start with them on and I'll turn them, or I'll start with them off and turn them on so you can hear what they do. I can't turn them all on at once here. You have to turn them on individually. So I'm just going to start turning them on. You'll see the power buttons up here where it says Mix Effects. Just keep your eye up on here. And then also the master bus, and you'll start to hear what the cumulative effect of this thing can do. So here we go. Okay, so what I hear in the headphones here is when you bring these in, by the time you get to the 5th instance of this, you'll start to hear the mix get a little bit wider and it gets a little bit more aggressive sounding, and again, in a very subtle way. Okay, so that's why I think it's a good idea to use these on multiple buses. Now, the last thing that we really didn't talk about here on this, and there is a tonal difference, and I'll show this to you in a second. I'll do this on the, I'll shut them all off here and just do it on the master bus so you could hear it on one instance. There are these 2 buttons up here that I can't seem to find. I said this in the last video, and if someone at Presonus or any of you watching can leave a comment below and let me know what these things mean. There are 2 buttons up here. There's an eco button and there's a channel bus button. And I can't find the user manual for these, so I don't know what these buttons do. And the few videos that Presonus themselves did on these plugins didn't even talk about these buttons. So my guess is that the channel in the bus is on a, when a channel is enabled, it's probably the modeling that they did for a specific channel inside of the console, whereas the bus is probably the bus section. That would be my guess, but I don't know. Remember I was saying a few minutes ago about there's a couple of third-party plugin companies that make kind of a 2-part plugin. They'll make a channel plugin and a bus plugin that'll be completely separate. And when you put them on your individual tracks, you would click the channel. And then when you put your instance on the buses, you click the bus. Again, it's just the way it's modeled. It just sounds slightly different and adds, again, a little bit more of that authenticity of the way a console really sounds, right? That's what I think this is. The Ego button, I think, probably has something to do with maybe some oversampling and such. I noticed on my performance monitor here in Studio One, if I go, I'm at 11% in eco mode. If I turn it off, oh, on this one, it's still, oh, turn it off. Yeah, it's still the same. On the Alpine desk, it actually crept up a couple of more percentage points on the CPU. I thought maybe that's what it was. I don't really know. So if anybody knows what these 2 buttons really are officially, because I don't see a user manual anywhere on Presonus's website on these, I would be great to know. Let us all know, educate us. But anyway, here's the master bus instance and only this instance, and let's flip between the channel and the master and the bus and the eco and see if we could hear any difference. Here we go. little more forward sounding. That definitely has a more audible effect than it did in the last video. Let's go from bus to channel. So the channel seems like it's a little bit more open in the upper mid, especially on that acoustic guitar, just slightly. The bus seems like it's a little more warm. So it just got a little bit of tonal variation. So you could go ahead and you can mess around with these controls and come up with all kinds of different tonal options. So it's really cool. So I think these are really cool plugins. I said in the last video, and I'll say it again in this video, in case you didn't see the last video yet, because you're going to click the link in the description box, right? I commend and tip my hat to Presonus, because they continue to try to bring you, exclusively in Studio One, these kind of analog style plugins. And it starts all the way back from the Fat Channel when they did the FET comp and the Tube comp and the passive EQ, and then the Console Shaper Pro, and now the Retro Legends, I think they call it, Retro Mix Legend, something to that effect, with the Alpine, the Brit console, and then the Porta cassette, which we'll look at in the next video. And what it really does is it allows you to not have to go out and buy a bunch of third-party plugins. If you're a Presonus Studio One user and a Pro user, and if you don't mind paying for a couple of these additional plugins, and they're very reasonably priced. Again, I think I paid $80 for 3 plugins, and that's pretty darn good. And they all sound different from each other, which is what you would expect. You really don't have to get any other plugins. You got kind of everything you need here. And I commend Presonus for doing that. There's no other DAW that quite does that. Logic does something similar on some level, but not like what Presonus is doing. Most of the stuff that I heard Presonus do with their state space modeling is pretty good. It's pretty good. And we've had on live streams and stuff in the past where we've actually shot their plugins out against Universal Audio, Waves, and other companies too. And they stand up to them. So I think they've done a great job, and I think this is something worth looking at. The only thing that I will say, and I wish Presonus would change this, and maybe they will by the time you see this video, is I don't believe you can demo their plugins. You have to buy them. That to me is for a paid plugin, you should be able to demo it. Now, maybe you can. I couldn't find out a way to do it. You never used to be able to do that. Every plugin company allows you to demo their plugins, even if it's only for 7 days. And I think it would be smart of Presonus, and just a recommendation, and maybe, a thing that they can add in the future, instead of, having people pay for it outright, not knowing if they like it, and really depending on listening to it over YouTube in a YouTube video, which, to be totally honest with you, with a plugin like this is not the best way to do it. You really got to get it in your studio and listen to it on your monitoring system to really appreciate the full effect. It'd be nice if you could demo their plugins. You just got to buy and hope that you like them, which hopefully they'll change that. Maybe they will. But these are great sounding plugins. This one is great. The Alpine Desk is great, and so is the Porta cassette. So if you trust in what good old Uncle Dave says to you, if you've been watching me for a while, I'd say you have a safe bet picking up these plugins. I think you'll enjoy them. They are really cool. And again, if you put them on multiple buses in your session, you can really breathe some of that analog vibe back into your mix, especially if you're only mixing with stock plugins. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the look at the Brit console here by Presonus. This is great. Thanks so much for sticking around till the end of the video. Now, as I said in the beginning, I want you to go out to homerecordingmadeeasy.com. I want to give you that free mixing course. It's right on the website. And by the way, if you're a Studio One user, that free course is all mixed in version 5 of Studio One. So you get to see all Studio One stuff. And if you're not a Studio One user, all the concepts and techniques are all, cross-platform. You can use it in any DAW, but I do all of my training courses in Studio One. And speaking of Studio One training courses, on the homerecordingmadeeasy.com website, if you click the training courses page, you will see a link where I have a page of just Presonus Studio One training that are specific to Studio One, and they're all been redone in year 2020 and 2021 for version 5. So you'll see the latest and greatest training, and I have more training courses on Presonus than anyone else on planet Earth. Yes, I said that. Everyone else on planet Earth. So I think you'll really enjoy them. So if you want to check out some Presonus courses on my website, go ahead if you're a new Studio One user. And because you stay till the end of the video, I want to give you a discount on those Studio One courses if you decide to pick one up. use the coupon code YouTube25. Use the coupon code YouTube25. That will take 25% off any one of the training courses on my website, whether it's the studio ones, specific ones, or the EQ, compression, mixing, and mastering ones. Whatever it is, it will take 25% off. And until next video, I've been Dave with HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.